Hey, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll give everyone a couple minutes here to kind of join in. Uh, but yeah, we appreciate everyone kind of shuffling around. Um, I did try to send a few emails out a bit earlier, saying that this will be kind of on YouTube live stream on our YouTube channel to kind of avoid any other issues with this sort of webinar format. Uh, but it sounds like maybe one of the emails that was sent out earlier did have an older link. So we had to kind of update that. So thank you everyone for your patience and understanding there. We're very excited to join you. We have um, Hannah Stiles as well. She's our nutritionist in Parksville. She'll be doing a portion of the presentation today as well. And yeah, it's definitely a good chance to kind of talk about different aspects of budgeting. This is definitely something that I'm passionate about as well. So it should be, yeah, it should be a good kind of listen and definitely some options and availability for some Q&A kind of sprinkled throughout as well. So we'll give everyone a couple more minutes and we'll get started around 6:37, 6:38 or so. And so for those of you who have already joined, we will be having this presentation recorded on our YouTube channel, along with a handout and several recipes and some resources, which will be emailed out to each participant. So don't feel any rush or incentive to have to take notes. Um, this will all be provided to everyone after the presentation. Yeah, we'll give it about another 30 seconds for people to join in. This webinar altogether will probably be um, about under an hour or so in terms of the talking portion, and then there'll be a time for Q&A at the end, and also a little bit kind of towards the beginning, just to get an assessment of where people are at. Okay, so we get underway here. So, like I said, today we'll be talking about nutrition and budgeting around that. My name is Chris Colhane. I'm the dietitian and nutrition operations manager for Choices Market. I've been with Choices for about 10 months now, and very excited to be joining everyone on a topic that I'm definitely passionate about. So, first and foremost, I do want to do territory acknowledgement. I'm very lucky and privileged to be joining everyone from the Commercial Drive location, which is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Stamanis, Tsawela-Tooth, Hunkaminam Treaty Group, Stolo, Squamish, Musqueam, Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla nations. I'm always very grateful to be an honored guest here, and always important to kind of reflect on where we're coming from and how lucky we really are to be able to call Vancouver or BC our home. So today's agenda, similar to our last webinar, if we have some sort of recurring participants, we'll have a chance to kind of go over our nutrition team and kind of introduce different nutritionists there. We'll do a brief knowledge assessment to kind of gauge where people are at in terms of budgeting or sort of their literacy around those things. We'll talk about nutrition and sort of different budgeting tips and sort of my own practical, professional, and personal experience with budgeting. And then we'll also hand it over to Hannah. And as I've alluded to, Hannah Stiles is our nutritionist in Parksville, and she'll kind of go into some more practical tips, a little bit of emphasis on plant-based eating as well, and kind of preparing legumes. And then we'll have a time for sort of more kind of open-ended questions at the end. But if anyone has any questions throughout, feel free to kind of put them in the YouTube chat. We do have a moderator. It shows up kind of as Choices Market on the screen, but that's Anna Pepperdine, and she'll be kind of moderating throughout and just letting Hannah or I know if there are questions that arise. Okay, so a little bit about the nutrition team. And I guess for starters, that would be kind of on my half here. So prior to Choices, I worked at Ridge Meadows Hospital for about 10 months, and I was a clinical dietitian there. I worked kind of exclusively like in ER, general surgery and medicine, at the chemo clinic, and also kind of in rehab, and in sort of senior center, senior home there. Definitely a really good, really great chance to kind of fine tune those skills. I'm definitely very grateful for my mentors and all the wonderful people and sort of networks that I was able to establish there. Prior to that experience, I was lucky enough to go to UBC and pursue dietetics to become a dietitian. And I had a number of different wonderful practicum rotations. My first one was in Nanaimo, specifically in GI surgery. And then I've had stints as well at VGH, at the neuro ICU and sort of traumatic brain injury floors, also public health, also being in St. Paul's. I was at the Healthy Heart Clinic to kind of get a sense of how important diet really is in reducing cholesterol and preventing heart attacks and whatnot. So definitely a lot of different experiences I'm very grateful for. But my passion really is around public health. I think there's a lot of different things that we could be doing better to support our communities, and dietitians are included in that. And so it's definitely something I'm very excited and very passionate about. And that's kind of what led me to join Choices. Historically, Choices has been a really big pillar as far as community work, as far as doing a lot of free programs and initiatives. And that was something that I think was impacted with the coronavirus. And that was something that I was really hoping to kind of reinvigorate and really sort of engage with again. So that's a little bit about me. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime, sort of at nutrition@choicesmarkets.com. And I'm sure if you were to speak to any store member or a nutritionist, they would be happy to pass along my information as well. So a bit more about the nutrition team. So we do have 6 nutritionists on our team. So each store, each of our 11 locations do have a certified nutritionist that's at the floor level. You might see me kind of every now and then spattered around. But these nutritionists really are wonderful hubs, not just for nutrition knowledge, but also that community engagement piece that I was alluding to. So first up, we have Darcy Furness. She's been with Choices kind of, for quite a bit now, actually. And she's been a huge part of our team and a huge part of what South Surrey has been able to achieve. Darcy is a registered holistic nutritionist and graduate of the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. She specializes in healthy aging, metabolic health, and a wide array of nutrition-specific conditions or diets. Passionate about simplifying nutrition and helping others build a positive relationship with food. Darcy is well known in her community for her empathetic approach, delicious demos and recipes, and insightful nutrition talks. When she's not supporting clients, she enjoys hiking, biking, writing poetry, and spending time with loved ones. Similar to all of these nutritionists, you can kind of find them, for example, for Darcy, you can find her at obviously the South Surrey location or at South Surrey Nutrition at choicesmarkets.com. Next, we have Dion Legg, CNP from Abbotsford. Dion is a certified nutritional practitioner with a diploma in applied holistic nutrition from the Institute of Holistic Nutrition. She has pursued additional continuing education in herbal pharmacology and plant-based medicine making, as well as therapeutic nutrition and supplementation in practice. Dion has also completed specialized training through Monash University in the low FODMAP diet for managing irritable bowel syndrome or IBS. With a professional background in the clean energy sector, Dion brings a strong commitment to sustainability in her work as a nutritionist. She is especially interested in growing food and helping others reconnect with the land as a pathway to both personal and ecological well being. When she's not working with clients or teaching, you can find Dion tending the community garden or exploring local trails. So that's something we'll definitely touch on later in this presentation, but Dion is a wonderful outlet. She does a number of workshops in-house as well for our nutrition team around gardening. She really is quite a whiz with those things. And so I would definitely encourage or implore you to connect with her, even if you're not in the Abbotsford area. She definitely has a wealth of knowledge and experience when it comes to gardening or composting. Okay. Next, we have Vishnu. Vishnu is at our North Van, Yaletown Drive, at the Commercial Drive and Kerrisdale locations. Vishnu is a certified nutritionist and was a registered dietitian in southern India, where she developed deep appreciation for traditional whole food cooking. She holds advanced degrees in food science, sports nutrition, and business administration, with clinical training in both dietetics and sports nutrition. Vishnu blends a global, research-informed perspective with practical strategies to support healthy aging and overall wellness. Known for her engaging education style, simple but delicious recipes, and passion for food origins, she inspires people of all ages to eat well and live vibrantly. In her free time, she enjoys badminton, yoga, and exploring new recipes and culinary traditions from around the world. Another really great touch point there, and she's one of two sort of nutritionists that do specialize more on the sports side of things. So that's definitely an avenue that you could take as well. Next, we have Anna Pepperdine. She's in Kelowna. Anna is a certified nutritionist with a bachelor's degree with honors in nutrition from King's College London. She specializes in gut health, sports nutrition, and plant-based diets, and is advancing her expertise with certification from the Olympic Committee. Passionate about evidence-based, balanced nutrition, Anna supports her community in making sustainable, nourishing food choices through engaging talks, creative recipes, and practical wellness strategies. On a personal level, she enjoys cooking and experimenting with new recipes and hitting up Pilates. So as you can see, a lot of nutritionists do have their passions around food and cooking as well as things like hiking and exercise and movement. So definitely just, lovely people to chat with as well, even at a personal level. Okay, next we have Manny. Manny is our nutritionist in Kitsilano, Burnaby Crest, and the Cambie store. Manny is a certified nutritionist and passionate community educator known for her deeply insightful presentations, engaging in interactive nutrition games, and practical, approachable recipes. She brings a warm and inclusive energy to every workshop, helping individuals and families in the community make informed, sustainable, and joyful choices about food. With a focus on seasonal eating and whole body wellness, Manny's events are as educational as they are inspiring. Outside of work, Manny enjoys going to the gym, cooking, reading, and exploring local farmers markets. Okay, and last but not least, we have Hannah. She's our Parksville nutritionist. Hannah is a graduate of the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition and specializes in hormonal imbalance, mindful dietary practices, and creative strategies for eating more plant-based foods. She values a holistic approach to nutrition education, prioritizing ongoing education to remain current in the field and community. This includes certification in psychology, Reiki, herbalism, and adult education. Outside of the 9 to 5, you'll find her hiking and camping adventures with their dog, experimenting in the kitchen, or playing guitar. So definitely a number of different avenues and resources you can take. And just as a nutrition manager, I'm definitely very grateful for every nutritionist and their unique skill set. And so there are definitely a lot of avenues you can reach out to. You certainly don't have to just reach out to your nutritionist at your store. If there's something that was interesting or piqued your interest from these bios, you can certainly talk to your nutritionist or talk to myself, and we would be happy to refer you to different sort of skill sets as well. Okay, So this is the part where we're going to have a bit more engagement. We're going to gauge your knowledge, and so this is a chance for you to sort of submit a fact. You would just say fact or myth, sort of in the live chat function, and then we'll have Anna kind of moderate that. A fact or myth. It's important to stay away from canned and frozen foods, especially produce.
The live stream is in a little bit of a lag, so we're just gonna wait a couple seconds for the questions or the answers to start coming through.
No worries. Thanks, Anna.
So we have everyone saying that it is a myth.
That's great. Yeah, definitely choices. Customers and participants tend to be pretty with it with nutrition, but yeah, this is definitely a myth. I was even surprised to kind of understand about this in school, but this was a big sort of talking point at the Healthy Heart Clinic at St. Paul's, is to kind of maybe destigmatize or debunk that myth. And something that my mentor always said was just that Canadians just need to eat more vegetables, more produce in general. Like it's okay if it's canned or frozen because you're still getting that fiber content. There are still a number of very important vitamins and minerals that are preserved there. Okay, fact or myth? Canned tuna is something to limit due to its high mercury content.
We have mixed responses for this one. We have a fact, we have a myth.
Mhm.
And another fact. So I guess majority fact so far.
Okay, yeah. I mean, so there's definitely a little bit of misinformation with this one. So obviously, mercury is something I think to be mindful of. And we'll chat a little bit more about this because there is a kind of a slide dedicated to this. But mercury, there are definitely certain populations or certain people that you would want to be extra mindful of. Namely, anyone who's pregnant or breastfeeding. It's really, or especially, because of maybe infants or young children are susceptible at kind of having excessive mercury, which can certainly damage nervous system and sort of issues around that. But it is misinformation that it is kind of from canned tuna. So sort of what I've been taught in school and what mentors have gone through with me is that the things that are going to be really high in mercury are going to be like that really thick steak of tuna that you might get at a fancy restaurant. If you're outside of those three kind of population groups that I've outlined, then you probably don't need to be too concerned if you had that, on occasion, or if you had that maybe even like once every few weeks. But canned tuna actually is quite low in mercury, and so that's definitely something to kind of keep in mind. But I think canned tuna, and we'll kind of go into this a bit more in depth, is actually a really good option when it comes to nutrition, but also in terms of kind of cost as well. Okay, thank you, Anna. Fact or myth? Dried legumes and beans are hard to cook.
We have a couple myths coming in. Yeah, all answers are myth.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, personally, like I would have said fact. Like honestly, 4 or 5 years ago, I would have probably said that even while I was in school. And so there's, that's great that people are kind of aware of that. And Hannah's going to go a bit more in depth around this. But they're not as intimidating as people think. And they're extremely nutritious and they can also be a very delicious component of many dishes as well. Okay. Fact or myth, tofu and other soy products are important to avoid due to their high phytoestrogen content.
We're getting an it depends. So we have two it depends, one myth.
I love it. Yeah, I wonder if anyone who kind of wrote down it depends, like maybe you could go a bit more in depth. Curious what some of those thoughts are.
We're saying yes if pregnant. That's all the answers I'm getting so far. So,
Okay, no worries. Yeah, so definitely tofu and I think soy has become a bit more divisive in the last few years. I think as per a lot of nutrition, it can be very individual. And so, in general, I would recommend definitely sitting down with someone on our team to kind of have a proper consultation. We'll go through your diet, go through your medication and your sort of medical history and things like that, as long as you're comfortable with that. And we can kind of pinpoint if it is something that might be a concern. As far as like what we could say generally across the board, yeah, tofu and soy are very safe products. I think there's definitely a lot of misinformation around it, namely around phytoestrogen. So, my background is Japanese. Like we eat a lot of soy, and I think a lot of research shows that that's actually a huge leading reason why Japanese people, especially on Okinawa, can have longer life expectancy. Soy is just like any other legume; it's going to have a lot of benefits as far as reducing your cholesterol, helping manage your blood sugars and blood pressure, even protect it against certain cancers like colon cancer. But obviously, people do have some sensitivities and allergies around soy as well. So I think across the board, from a dietitian, and you would, if you ask any dietitian in Canada, they would probably tell you that it is safe. That's what we're taught in school, and that's what we're taught in clinic. But obviously, things can still be individual. So if you feel like you have some issues, definitely listen to your body, listen to your cues, or maybe just talk to a dietitian or talk to a healthcare professional. And we can definitely look a bit more in depth about that. But that's kind of the general answer across the board. Yeah, and we can certainly, if you have some more questions around what the phytoestrogen is, we could go a bit more in depth at the end, but essentially, it's a compound that looks like estrogen, but it doesn't behave the same as estrogen. And so when the research first came out, it wasn't conclusive, but it was more of like, should we be concerned, especially in men, for example, who are taking these estrogen mimicking compounds? But the answer is no. Yeah, fact or myth? Grocery budgeting is all about choosing the right grocery store and avoiding the expensive ones. Curious what people think about this one.
I'm getting a couple of myths. Yeah, everyone's answering myth.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, maybe it's a little bit surprising in some ways. And I know it maybe sounds like I have maybe invested interest, obviously being part of Choices Market, who really specializes in the highest quality organic and sort of conventional goods and sort of foods. But it really is like you can find good budgeting strategies within our team and from our team, and you can adopt that really at any grocery or any store. Um, and I'll go a bit more in depth about this in the introduction, but I'm certainly not trying to have false advertisement. But you can certainly find a lot of really good options at any grocery store. But I think what I like to remind people, regardless of Choices Market or not, is that if you can have two goods or two foods or two produce items that are roughly the same price, but you know that one is going to be much more higher nutrition quality. Yeah, most people are going to choose the higher nutrition quality. I think that's why I really wanted to have this webinar, is that there are a lot of really good deals and a lot of really good strategies that exist that maybe are a bit underutilized and people can take advantage of and use them when they're shopping at Choices or shopping anywhere. And you can still get the highest quality nutrition goods, highest quality wellness, foods and whatnot, but at a similar price. And so, why wouldn't you do that, right? That's kind of the paradigm that I certainly have, and I like to kind of adopt with clients. Okay, so that's the last question. What are your biggest questions or concerns around budgeting and nutrition or food?
We have one answer that says finding good expiration dates.
Interesting. I wonder if that person could like elaborate a little bit more on that. That's a very interesting kind of point.
Yeah, I will let you know if we get
Sure.
any elaboration.
No worries. And like I said, you can certainly kind of sprinkle in questions throughout the presentation, but yeah, it's always kind of good to know as a presenter too of where maybe people have some more questions around what kind of topics. Give it another minute or so.
We have one person who's saying budgeting is challenging and that she likes to purchase more high quality uh, grocery items and reduce the number of items.
It's fair, yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a number of different strategies you could have when it comes to that budgeting. Um, it's tricky. I think even just having a budget when it comes to food and nutrition, like it's hard. I don't always advise people to have like a strict budget. Obviously, like I think budgeting is one of those things that you probably would want to have a bit more of an in-depth individual conversation. but it's not always a great feeling to know like you have to hit a certain mark or a certain budget with nutrition, especially it sounds like this person prioritizes their health and their wellness to, to a degree for sure. Um, and it's tricky kind of figuring out, okay, like, do I want to have these items? Does that mean I have to have less but higher quality items? So maybe a little bit less variety. So that's definitely something we'll look into of how we can have variety, but also still have that sort of cost effectiveness. And I think, when I started out, even as a young adult, that seemed kind of, dichotomous, or it was one or the other. Either you have variety or you have, really good cost, and you're just kind of eating the same thing every single day. So we'll go a bit more in depth about that in our slides, and hopefully we can answer some of those questions. And if you have more questions, we can certainly go a bit more in depth at the end of the presentation.
We got some clarification, so
Okay.
about the expiration dates. So
Okay.
it's more to do with when that they want to buy things on sale,
Mhm.
but that's usually when they are close to expiring.
Yeah, definitely a really good question. So I'll keep that in mind, and we'll probably go over it in one of the slides. But yeah, that's the thing, you want to be mindful about that. And that's why, kind of going back to one of those points about having canned or frozen, that's definitely a really good avenue when we do buy things on sale. Um, and obviously, like being aware of how to kind of spot check produce, kind of feel out any concerns with mold or anything like that. But I think there are definitely, depending on the food, there are a number of different things we could do to sort of prepare it, to clean it, and to maybe cut it or prepare it in a certain way that will help it last better once we freeze it, if that's what we choose to do. Okay, so maybe I'll move on here, but please feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation. Okay, so introduction. So maybe just a bit about me. Um, yeah, so like I said, my passion's around public health, and it's actually around food security. And so, yeah, budgeting is something that I feel like probably most dietitians, do have an understanding, especially through education. But for me, growing up, I had a single mom, and we moved to Canada from Japan, and we didn't always have enough money for food, and that's what really inspired me to become a dietitian. And that's what kind of led me to want to have this passion around public health and around food security. And so I feel like just personally, I've been budgeting and I've been really learning all these different strategies and tips and tricks about how to choose nutrition but not compromise in terms of budget. And it's been through a lot of trial and error. And so that's definitely something I was hoping to share with everyone today. Sort of my own experiences and my kind of maybe practical tips around that. But like I always say, I strongly encourage anyone, if you feel like there are things after this webinar, like we're just kind of getting started, and there are unanswered questions, certainly reach out to us, and we would love to have, we offer free consultations or tours and follow-ups with anyone. So we can actually look at your specific, sort of eating habits, also kind of your likes and dislikes. I think that a lot of people sacrifice that when it comes to budgeting, and that's a shame. Food is meant to be enjoyed, life is meant to be enjoyed. And so there is certainly a way that you can, sort of have it all, hopefully, right? And when we look at kind of what the literature says, oftentimes, and this is certainly growing in Canada, most people they prioritize their rent, right? Like that's the first thing where their income will go towards, right? Their rent, obviously, and then they'll have their general expenses, their car, their cell phone, maybe it's their kids, or maybe it's their father, or whoever in a senior home or whatever it is, and then food is usually what's last, and that's what literature has shown, predominantly, even in the last 50 to 75 years. That's the kind of the way we do it. In my conversations with customers, especially at Choices, it feels like people prioritize their health a little bit more than maybe the general public. But that's just something to kind of keep in mind, right? We talk a lot about how food is medicine. And so I 100% understand. And humbly, I would say that I truly do understand what it's like to leave food as a last resort. But that's why I'm really hoping that we can go through some tips today to talk about how there are some strategies that we can take to not sort of compromise that nutritional quality as much as maybe we have in the past or other people have had. Um, so there are definitely some things to kind of keep in mind. Another thing that we'll probably go a bit more in depth about is that convenience costs money. A lot of the tips around sort of budgeting, it's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take a little bit of time to sort of meal plan or meal prep or to look into things. But in my experience, I find that a lot of the time that you invest in terms of budgeting is kind of upfront. But you don't have to worry or you don't have to stress about it once you're at the grocery store or even afterwards when you're looking at bills and things. And so you're going to spend that amount of time regardless, whether it's at the beginning or it's at the middle or it's at the end. But at some point, you're going to spend time maybe worrying about or thinking about budget and sort of even nutrition, right? And so that's why I think yeah, it can be a little bit arduous and a little bit hard to kind of work up the motivation to do that up front, but it is a habit, it is a skill, it is something that we can all, continuously learn and grow in. And it's certainly going to help, as time goes on, once you kind of establish these habits. So definitely a lot of different avenues we'll explore today and lots of opportunities for questions throughout. Okay, so I'll go a bit more into nutrition. So some of these things are kind of key themes. Um, and I promise you, I'm not just, trying to advocate for Canada's food guide as much as I do love Canada's food guide, and as dietitians certainly do. This stuff is certainly important because we want to talk about satiety. We want to talk about feeling full and also having good nutrition, right? We don't want to be in a position where we're sacrificing nutrition for cost because point blank, like that's a form of food insecurity. When we're at that point, we're really compromising nutrition to that degree. So I think it's important to establish what good nutrition looks like, but also how important good nutrition actually is for satiety. We've all been there where maybe our plate doesn't look like this. It doesn't look like half a plate of vegetables or fruit and a fruit, a quarter protein and a quarter whole grains or carbohydrates. And maybe it's like 90% carbohydrates. And we know that feeling where we're like, we're still hungry, and that's because of the satiety. When we talk about satiety, when we talk about feeling full, the really important things are going to be protein and fiber. And so if you're just having maybe simple carbohydrates, you're just having some white bread, some, white pasta with not a lot of extra fiber or protein, you can eat that all day and you're not going to feel very full and it's probably not going to be very nutritious for you. Um, so I think it's important to kind of establish these foundations. So I'll go into a bit more detail here. So Canada's food guide, that's definitely something that we use. Like it's our bread and butter, especially with diabetic or blood sugar sort of minded people, along with heart health. When we talk about the sort of main thing, we look at what the 2007 version was a lot more sort of prescriptive, saying, you're in this age group, these are the number of servings that you need. It's kind of adopted a lot more of a guideline sort of mentality. But the big sort of takeaway from the Canada's Food Guide, the updated version, is sort of this healthy plate model. So I like to look at either the healthy plate model or the sort of hand portion guide. I'm a big fan of the hand portion guide because I think it's kind of fun. I think it is kind of cool to think that it's applicable to your body size. But essentially, what you're aiming for is about for each meal, um, whether you eat twice a day or 3 times a day or beyond, you want about half of your plate or two handfuls of produce, of vegetables and fruit. That can certainly be a bit daunting. But when we think about how we just need to eat more fruit and vegetables, it doesn't really matter if it's fresh, if it's canned or frozen. That's something that my mentors at St. Paul's always said. Like Canadians just need to eat more vegetables, right? When we think about what maybe a typical person would have in their plate, it's probably half of their plate is probably carbs, and then a quarter of their plate is protein, and a quarter of plate is the produce, right? And so kind of having a switch is really important because those vegetables and fruit are going to be very high in fiber, and they're going to be very high in vitamins and minerals. And so there certainly is such thing, at least anecdotally or my experience, where I feel different types of fullness. Sometimes I feel like, oh, I feel, I don't feel full. I feel like I missed out on some protein. Or sometimes I feel like I didn't. I feel pretty lousy and I don't feel very good. And I feel like it's because I didn't have any fruits or vegetables. And I feel like most people will probably kind of get a sense of what that feeling is like, kind of what their internal cue or what their body is saying. And so your body is kind of craving those vitamins and minerals along with that fiber. Fiber is one of the most important things we could get in our diet. And probably, 80 to 90% of Canadians probably don't meet the recommended amount because it is quite high. You know, you're looking at about, over 25 grams per day of dietary fiber for women and over 30 grams per day for men. So that is quite a bit when you think about it. And that's why if you eat this sort of guideline, you follow these principles, you shouldn't really have to calorie count or really look at the specific grams as much. It's just more of a guideline to kind of follow. So just having more options of fruits and vegetables is really important. Even if it's just adding some frozen peas and carrots into your soup or into your spaghetti next time, or like you have some spinach. Um, so this is kind of the foundation. We'll go a bit more in depth into what that actually looks like and how we could apply that in a budget sort of mindset. So that's kind of two handfuls. And any fruit is good. That's another thing is people always kind of maybe demonize certain fruit. But if you're not if you're not diabetic and you're not very concerned with your blood sugars, then any fruit is okay. And if you are concerned about those things, it's just important to have them with a meal. You don't really want to have 3 or 4 oranges in one sitting. It's much better to have, an apple or banana and have it pair it with something. So it's going to sort of slow down your digestion. Um, so that's kind of fruits and vegetables, right? So next we can talk about our carbohydrates. Most of you probably are familiar that we want to be choosing those whole grains. Whole grains are going to be much higher in fiber. It's going to help us feel more full. It's going to be way more nutritious for us. It's going to have massive benefits for our digestive health, like I said, for our blood sugars, for our cholesterol, even for our blood pressure, reducing our risk for cancers. Though that fiber is really going to be found in our carbohydrates and our fruits and vegetables. So we aim for about a quarter of our plate or about a fist size. So just one fist size for, sort of your body proportion of those whole grains or starchy vegetables. So definitely, another good ways of adding that fiber would be like leaving the skin on of your potato or even your sweet potato. It doesn't seem like much, but it's really important to kind of sort of move away from that all or nothing approach of nutrition and just having a bit more fiber. You don't have to, it can be really daunting to have to hit those targets right away, but just having more fiber is going to be beneficial. So focus on those benefits and maybe a little bit less from, just having to meet those really high goals at the start. Okay, then next we have protein. So protein is the other quarter of our plate, or we like to say about a palm size, thickness of a pinky. Another really good sort of way to visualize it is about a deck of cards. So that's one sort of protein size. There certainly is a lot of, sort of maybe discourse currently to push high protein. And protein is certainly very good for you. There are certain times that maybe you want to be mindful of protein, namely if you have like kidney issues, for example. But it's sort of in the context of today, considering that we're trying to be mindful of budgeting. Yeah, certainly looking at maybe some more cost-effective proteins, namely maybe plant-based proteins or supplementing them with plant-based protein. So it's not just one big piece of meat. Can definitely be really helpful. But those are all things that really help. We talk about variety, and we'll talk a bit more about that as this presentation goes on. But making sure that we feel satiated is really crucial. It can be very depressing when you feel like your diet, you're very sort of stringent on cost, but also you're not really being satiated and you're not really meeting your nutrition needs. So those are all really, really important prerequisites. I think of just overall health, and those are all really good starting points. Speaking of hydration, so hydration is another really key aspect of like overall nutrition, obviously, but satiety as well. Feeling, like we have, very good sort of skin, maybe nice hair and nails and whatnot, as well as our organs, being able to sort of have good, obviously body temperature regulation, good movement, good joints, all these things, hydration is crucial for them. um, our sort of like the guideline is to have about 2 liters or about 8 to 10 cups of fluid per day. So fluid is not restricted to just water. Other forms of fluid would include, tea, soup, if you were to have that. Even things like porridge or oatmeal would have that. Obviously, milk or plant-based milks as well are another really great forms. I would just say be mindful about sugar and caffeine. Um, excuse me. If you're someone who really does love those iced coffees or their juice, it can be important to just be mindful about that. If you certainly feel like it's putting certain systems within your body out of whack, or especially with juice, I find that even cutting it down with water or sparkling water can make a big difference. If you're someone who drinks a lot of juice, then like I say, just having those small sort of, subtle changes, it does go a long way over a lifetime, right? Pop is another thing as well. So there certainly is a lot of, maybe literature and fear around sort of like those sugar-free pops. But if you're someone who's really, struggling with their blood sugars, maybe who are diabetic, then having those sugar-free pops are always going to, be better options than just having that regular pop as well. But obviously water is always going to be really, really great, and especially around the summer months. And that helps with obviously feeling full, but also overall nutrition as well. Okay. So those are kind of the general things as far as nutrition to just kind of keep in mind as we go on. Other things to kind of keep in mind is sort of the prep work, as I've alluded to. Sort of being diligent about things that are on sale. Flyer is another really good thing. I know a lot of our customers are sort of regular customers at Choices, but they don't always have access to vehicles. And so it can be a challenge, right? So really kind of being diligent about the flyer can be important. I wonder if maybe I can just kind of, maybe I'll screen share here. I like to go look at this, right? Like, you just go to the Choices website, you just kind of go to flyers, right? Yeah, then you can just kind of click on it. You can do this on your phone, you can do this at home, and it can really help. I find that for me, like when I kind of started doing these flyers when I was first starting out in school, I found it really helpful because it has the images, right? And you think about, the kind of animals and human beings, like we really feed off of images, and it can be inspirational, it can be really helpful. So you can see like this week coming up, you're like, okay, maybe I'm in a North Van area, or maybe I live nearby there, right? So I can go check out their 15% off sale for their entire store. They even have sort of, you know, different options that might be specific to North Van as well. So they might have other additional discounts on top of that 15% off. You can see build your burger. So these are things that, like, even just as a non-dietitian, I would look at, be like, oh wow, okay, so ground poultry, that's something that would be really easy to freeze, right? I could prepare a whole bunch. I could prepare some with like maybe like a certain kind of rub. I could do like a Cajun rub for half of my batch, and maybe I could do like a masala or something else with another half. So yeah, they're burgers, but they have some variety there. It doesn't all have to be the same. Like we kind of alluded to, it just takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of experience, but there is a starting point for everybody. And so just kind of continuing to add on those skills, that literacy is important. Nice. So I'm going through this. I'm like, okay, like, yeah, what else are things? Like I looked at this. Yeah, corn on the cob, right? That's a really good deal. It's organic, it's local. It's probably like, just from Chilliwack around obviously BC. 4 for 5. So maybe if I'm really really keen, or if I'm really tight on in terms of budget that week, like maybe I buy all buy four or buy extra, and then I just kind of fry them up. So yeah, I find there are different ways that it can kind of help with the texture and flavor. In my experience, even just grilling the corn, and then what I like to do is I'll grill the corn and then I'll kind of cut it off. Cut the little obviously niblets and pieces off, and then I'll put them in a nice container. Obviously, make sure it's airtight, and then I'll put it in the freezer. And I find that that toasted part, it kind of keeps its integrity, keeps the flavor a little bit better once it's frozen. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Potatoes, like that's another good thing that can, you can definitely do something. You can meal prep with it and then put it in your freezer and just have it there for a rainy day or for anything like that. And I find that with the freezer thing, and maybe that's like one tip that I would have for a lot of my clients who are looking at, really sort of utilizing their freezing system, is just to freeze a bit more, freeze extra, right? So if you just freeze only like, a small or medium percentage of things, then it can be a little bit, cumbersome, or you can eat the same thing over and over again. But if you freeze a good amount of things in a given week or a given month, you'll have a lot of variety. And we'll go a bit more in depth about what I tend to do with freezing in the next few slides as well. So other things that I would, yeah, like, meats are good. Whole chickens are always good, so I wonder if you go to the North Van, is that 15% off plus this is 15% off? So that might be a really good deal. And then those whole chickens, I'm a big fan of adding them into anything, right? You certainly, don't have to have it as the main protein source. We'll go a bit more in depth about different plant-based options, different beans, different things you could supplement with it. But whole chickens are great just because they're so easy, and they could have, easy access to your salads, your soups, your stews, sandwiches. There's a lot of different things you could do. Even things like wieners, hot dogs. Those are all things that, yeah, they tend to do pretty well in the freezer. Obviously, if it's packaged up, it's going to be a little bit better integrity. Yeah, so those are the things you can kind of keep in mind. Um, and like I say, please reach out to us if you want a bit more of an in-depth, and we can kind of do this together. But I find it's kind of, yeah, like if you have a budget in mind, it's kind of fun to go look at the flyer so you can kind of start brainstorming, what you want to do that week, right? Um, you know, I've had a lot of different experiences with food, and when I was first starting out in college, like I was, I was kind of on my own, and so I I was down to like I think like $3 a day for all food, and I wouldn't recommend that. I mean, I was nutritious. I was eating mostly a plant-based diet at that point, kind of due to cost. But I think that in general, like you can probably have a really nutritious breakfast if you do good meal prepping, good meal planning, like even less than $5, per breakfast a day in a given week. Lunch, similar thing. Maybe dinner is like $10 or so. If you kind of do those really smart strategies that we'll go into, and it kind of really prepare a good amount of food, and maybe to even freeze a little bit extra, right? Yeah, so lots of really good things to keep in mind. I'm a big fan of canned seafood as well. So yeah, lots of good options. Yeah, so definitely something I would encourage anyone to do, to take a look at those flyers. Yeah. So, when I think about like, it really does depend that variety piece, right? So like I'm a big fan of having smoothies for breakfast. I'm usually on the go. And I think that, I find that with a smoothie, I can have some really good good fruit in there, some really good veggies. I like to go for generally like a spinach, celery, then I'll mix it up, right? Sometimes they'll have a little bit of carrot in there. Maybe sometimes we'll have some blueberries. That's something else that, fruit is can definitely be really good, and things can be easier to put in the freezer if you're going to put it into a smoothie. It actually gives it a really nice sort of, chilled feature, and maybe a nice texture. And then a little bit of, some sort of nuts or seeds in them. I like to put flax seeds in them, and then some protein powder. And I find that, yeah, that's, for me, that's a pretty complete meal. I'm not a huge breakfast guy, and so I find that that's a really good sort of thing. And I try to swap them out depending on how I'm feeling. Maybe I'll do something completely different. I'll put in kale sometimes, or I'll put in completely different base as far as smoothies go. Um, yeah, and then I know some people, they really want to have a very different lunch than dinner. I think that kind of depends on your preferences. For me, like I don't mind if they're a bit similar. I don't want to eat the same thing for lunch and dinner that one day, and I'm sure most people are like that. But for lunch, like a lot of times, I'll just kind of meal prep at the beginning of the week. I'll take a look at what's on sale, what's kind of coming up, and I'll try to I usually try to prepare something kind of meat based for the week, just because I really do like my chicken and sort of like ground beef and things like that. And that way I make a good portion and then I can kind of sprinkle it out throughout the week. Um, and we'll go a bit more in depth about this in the protein section. But I find that having, preparing foods that are kind of a base, I find that's a really good strategy, right? So when we think about ground beef, for example, what I would do is I would, if there's a really good sale on ground beef, like sometimes we have like a buy one, get one free at Choices. I'll buy like 4 or 5. I'll buy like, like my partner will be like, that's kind of an absurd amount of meat. And I buy a lot, but I think ahead, right? And so I'll just kind of split it up. I'll have half of that and I'll just make like a really nice bolognese or a really nice ragu with it. And when you have a base like that, it's really easy to incorporate into any dish. So I'll make a whole bunch and I'll put some in the fridge and I'll put some in the freezer. And then, when I'm thinking about it for the next later this week or next week, I'm like, oh, I have that bolognese. Maybe I can make Mexican food with it. I could probably incorporate that into a stir fry. I could easily put that into a soup, a chili, or a stew, burrito, even for, you know, like something as simple as like just noodles. Like there's a lot of different things you can do. And so I find that when you have those things kind of prepped up as a really strong base, I find it's a lot easier to kind of pair it and to make it into a better and different meal so you don't get really tired out from it. And then the other half of the ground beef, then I might do something totally different seasoning. I might incorporate, some different legumes into it. I'm a big fan of chickpeas, along with like that ground beef. I think that's always fun to do. It's really tasty. So those are all kind of things you can do, and I think having that base can be really helpful. Okay, so canned versus, like we kind of mentioned. So that was another thing that we talked a lot about at the Healthy Heart Clinic. Um, Regardless of sort of your cholesterol levels, or sort of history, with heart attack or stroke, there are so many, as long as, you like seafood, there are so many benefits, to having seafood twice a week, or like 2 dinners a week. Um, we know that, it goes beyond just lowering your cholesterol. We know that the healthy omega fats, in things like seafood, but also, in your avocado oil or avocados, certain nuts and seeds, like they have a protective effect on your heart. So it goes beyond just, lowering your cholesterol, but it actually protects your heart against, heart attacks and cardiovascular disease. So seafood is just amazing. And so, yeah, with my little nephew and stuff, like what I love to do is, if there's a good deal, like you get some extra canned, goods, right? You get some extra canned salmon. And what we'll do is we'll go to the store, we'll get some canned salmon. And then I like to put a little bit of green onion, maybe some corn, a little bit of mayonnaise, and I'll just make a whole bunch of patties. And I find patties or something else that if you have a good binder, you have some eggs and breadcrumbs, it stores pretty well in the freezer. And I'll just make a whole bunch of extra, right? And it's not just for, when I want to eat something different, but it's also just, for ease and convenience too. That's something else that can be really easy to do. Even if it's just a tuna salad, that probably wouldn't store quite as well in the freezer. But if it's canned, you just have to make whatever amount you need for that meal, or maybe for the next day and so forth. And you can make a really nice sort of tuna salad sandwich. And it's very cost effective, very high protein source. And also, like I said, those really healthy fats. So it just takes a little bit more time. But if you do that work kind of at the beginning, then it really sets yourself up for later that week or later in the month when you have this plethora of options in your freezer and your fridge. And it's still very, highly nutritious. and you don't have to really worry about it. So those are things I'm always kind of thinking about. And kind of alluding to an earlier question about buying things on sale. So if you bought things on sale, um, I think it really depends on what produce items you're buying. Obviously, things that are going to be higher in water content, like tomatoes, even celery to a certain degree, it's going to be a lot harder to store that in the freezer. And so I find that, yeah, incorporating them into something like a soup or into a sauce, it's going to store much better in the freezer. And it's still going to be very nutritious because of that fiber and because of those vitamins and minerals. Um, so it does take a bit more time, but that way you don't have to really do it. Another thing is canning. Canning is something that can be really, really great. It can be a little bit intimidating, but we do offer different workshops, and a number of our nutritionists are well versed in that. And so that's another really good option too, is if you have some really good sale produce items, is to can them. You can pickle them. And it's going to store quite a while, and you got them at a pretty good price too, and it's very nutritious, right? We don't think about it, but pickles are a form of fermented food. And I love pickling at home because, when I would work with patients or work with people who had a really high blood pressure or maybe who had heart failure, you had to be really mindful about their salt intake. We have a number of different recipes available to us for pickling with very low, if any, sodium. You can have different substitutes, really sort of utilizing vinegars and different, garlic, different herbs, and you can still get that pickling effect with very low sodium. So I'm a big fan of pickling. I think it's something else that can be really helpful when it comes to budgeting. Okay, protein. So we've already kind of touched on this, but the plant protein is really, really great. Um, I know that there certainly is a lot of kind of movement around plant-based eating, but like I've said already a few times, you certainly don't have to have all or nothing approach with it. Just eating more plant-based foods. And when we have good nutrition, we focus on adding the right foods. Eventually, we kind of lose our craving. It kind of kicks out some of those things we should probably be limiting a little bit. It's we get into problems, and there's so many, I think, issues with dieting and that whole sort of kind of paradigm because we focus on removing too much, and it's not very fun when you have to remove something, especially if you enjoy that eating, and we forget to like replace it with something, and that's when we have a lot of issues because at that point we're essentially just kind of starving ourselves, and we're not really focusing on good nutrition at that point. Obviously, starvation is not very beneficial for our body long term at all, right? So having those plant-based options can be really, really great. You don't have to have just a plant-based meal. I love, I lived in Saskatchewan for a bit, so I love having, good game, and I love having meat. And so just adding in some extra legumes can go a long way. It can also be really great for cost, right? So when I'm preparing that ground beef for my pasta or for my stew, yeah, I'll add some chickpea. It's going to help with the nutrition. It's going to help with feeling full as well. And there's just so many benefits to having legumes. We know that it has benefits for lowering your cholesterol, helping lower your blood sugar if you have issues with that. Um, Also, your blood pressure. It supports your digestive system. It supports so many organs throughout your body. And there are just so many wonderful options. I'm sure Hannah will go a bit more in depth about different plant-based options, but I think the only thing to kind of keep in mind is that you really got to marinate those suckers. You got to have to prepare them and kind of have a good recipe. When we just have tofu on its own, or we just have beans on its own, it's not going to be very tasty at all. And I don't blame anybody who doesn't like, I don't think anybody wants to eat that without a good sauce. So just make sure you kind of work with a nutritionist or work with someone or find a really good recipe. It's great that people are much more into plant-based eating now. So I'm sure that you probably know someone who's a big advocate, and they probably would be happy to share a recipe. But I find that, yeah, I've certainly gone down that route of trial and error with plant-based proteins, and it can be a bit of a harder one. So don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we will be happy to share some extra recipes. I'll be sure to include those for the email that goes out. But yeah, I think that's the only one thing to kind of keep in mind. Um, Something else that I didn't touch on earlier with fiber is that we really want to be mindful about adding fiber gradually. A lot of people, especially when I was at the Healthy Heart Clinic, they would add a lot of fiber all at once, and they would come back and they would have some pretty, pretty substantial, digestive symptoms, a lot of bloating, a lot of gas, a lot of discomfort. But fiber is something that it really requires a certain unique subset of that healthy bacteria and sort of our cells in our gut to break down. It's not easy to break down a lot of these fibers. And so it can be quite a shock for your body if you just go from maybe a pretty low fiber diet to all of a sudden a very high one. So it's important to be gradual. Um, a lot of people, when we have these talks, they'll go home and they're like, I'm going to have, legumes every single day. And then that's what's going to happen is you're going to have some issues. So just, I think gradually doing it is important just to kind of avoid those sort of discomforts and any pain that might arise. So canned seafood, we touched on this. Yeah, mercury is something you really don't have to be a concern if you're outside of that sort of population group of sort of pregnant women, breastfeeding women, and sort of young children. But I think, canned seafood is another really great option. Anything canned is great, as long as you're just mindful about that sodium content. And so, I think those are a lot of different, really good options. Salmon is great. Tuna, even some other, different bivalves and oysters and things like that. There are some canned options. Even sardines, another really good option. So I think just, if sodium is a concern for you, then just kind of be mindful about that and where else you might be getting that sodium in your diet. But canned seafood is another really good option for anyone really as well. Okay. So yeah, I've already kind of touched on this, but cooking, obviously when we cook, it really does help with cost. Regardless of where you're going, if you're eating out, you're either going to probably go somewhere that's a little bit cheaper, but probably not as nutritious, or in general, food cost has really risen in the last 2 or 3 years. I'm sure no one here is immune to that, including myself and the people on the team. Um, but I think cooking at home, it really does make a difference for cost and nutrition. There are a lot of things that can go into our food at the restaurants that we're unaware of when it comes to sodium and it comes to fat, namely saturated fat, which we know does increase our risk for heart disease and different illnesses. Um, so it's just important to kind of keep that in mind. I think when we have the chance to cook, it really does make a difference. But hopefully, some of the tips I've kind of gone through, you can see that, yeah, you're kind of cooking, but you're also kind of helping yourself out a little bit later in the week, by getting, some of those canned or frozen options. It doesn't have to all be prepared. And really, meal prepping is another really big thing. It can really help sort of throughout the week and really help with budgeting as well. Yeah. So like I, touched on, kind of cooking those bases, another really good thing to do. Things that you can easily season up, season differently, depending on what sort of cuisine you're hoping for. And kind of really taking advantage of that freezer, I think can go a long way. Obviously, everyone's a bit different in terms of what their tolerance is. I think it's important to invest in good Ziploc bags and good containers that are going to keep your food, sort of at a good consistency and good integrity. If you do go the freezer route, it's a total shame if you go through all this, preparation, this cooking, and your thing or your food or whatever has freezer burn. It's not a very good feeling. Freezer burn doesn't really impact the nutritional integrity of the food, but it certainly impacts the texture and it can impact the taste as well. So those are things to kind of keep in mind. I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if there are some more questions around about this, but I'll do my last slide before tagging it on to Hannah. So other considerations, other things like that I like to always remind, anybody, whether it's my family, friends, or clients, generally it's you want to be careful about shopping anywhere, even especially with food on an empty stomach. I've made it a point with my partner, if we're gonna go out grocery shopping and we're both hungry after work, like let's just stop to get a little nibble on something because it makes a big difference. And I feel like most people probably know that, when we're eating, or we're not, we're not eating, we're hungry and we go grocery shopping, everything looks so good. Like we just want to get everything in our cart. And maybe from a choices market standpoint, that's not a terrible thing. But I think when we talk about budgeting, that is a sneaky good tip to kind of keep in mind, to kind of make sure that you don't have to be full when you're out shopping, but don't be super hungry, because that can definitely go a long way. Making a list, that's another really really good thing to do. If you even want to do that experiment, if you want to go home next week, or later today and do some of these things, you can see the difference between grocery shopping on an empty stomach versus not, and grocery shopping with a list and without a list. I've done that experiment. We had to do that in school, and it was pretty like significant. I was amazed at how many more things you're more likely to buy, kind of without that list. And having that list also probably requires you to have that meal planning, that meal prep, that idea of, okay, if I buy this ground beef, buy this thing, it's going to be, I'm going to have Mexican, for the first couple of nights. Then I could probably, put in the freezer. The next week I'll have it again for shepherd's pie or something like that with lamb or whatever, right? So making that list can be really great. Store name brands, another really good sort of thing to keep in mind. At Choices Market, we have Only Goodness, and that's sort of an organic, sort of store name brand, another really good option. I definitely turn to them when it comes to canned, legumes and whatnot. If I'm like traveling and I don't have access to my pressure cooker or things like that. But also even pastas and sauces. Only Goodness is another really good thing because, yeah, it can be hard, to find those store name brands that are organic or higher nutrition content. So I'm a big fan of them. And then gardening, that's my last tip. It can really go a long way. It can be really fulfilling. It can really help with feeling community. But yeah, it just really helps. I think it actually does go a long way. I'm just kind of starting out in terms of gardening, but even then, even now, I see the difference it makes over a year, over a month, in terms of budget. And that's something, again, like, I'm looking forward to pickling those things, for the rest of this year as well. So definitely a couple of things to kind of keep in mind. I'll pass it on. One second. I'll probably start the next part here. Then I'll pass it on to Hannah shortly. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're all good.
Perfect. All right. Hello, I'm Hannah. I'm the nutritionist at Parksville. Chris, do you want me to go through all the slides for the sake of time? Do you think we've got enough time for this? Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so we're going to talk about some dried foods. So just a little introduction about my experience with dried foods. So I, about 7 years ago, switched to a plant-based diet. And I grew up with a very standard meat and potato type diet. So it was a very intimidating transition for me, and it was rough. I think the first week I went to A&W and had their Beyond Meat burgers pretty much every day. So that was not great. So I definitely know how intimidating it can be to start incorporating some of these dried foods. But it's kind of something that you can start to pick away at little by little. And they end up being a really affordable option and a really tasty option and nutrient dense. So we're going to start with a couple little quizzes for you guys. So yeah, can you guess the legume or the dried food, I guess? So the first one here, if you want to go to the slide, here's 3 facts about this one, and you guys let me know which one you think it is. So this particular dried food can be any color, ranging from white to black, yellow, pink, red, brown, and green. The organic version of these have the lowest greenhouse gas emissions and require the least amount of water of the top 20 nutrient-dense and protein-rich foods you can consume. And humans have been eating them for at least 13,000 years. What do we think it is? Yeah, you got it. I have one of my loyal workshop attendees sitting here with me. She's got it, but she just mouthed it. Has anybody else got any guesses?
Nothing so far.
fair. Well,
Oh,
it's
we
it's
have
lentils.
legumes. Yeah,
Okay,
just legumes.
well, fair enough. You're not wrong, technically. So this one's lentils. Let's go to the next slide, Chris. Okay, so this one contains a high concentration of essential amino acids, one of our main sources of protein in our global food supply. The production of this has more than doubled over the last 2 decades, and almost 80% of the world's of this crop is fed to livestock, especially for beef, chicken, egg, and dairy production. Any ideas here? Chris did talk about this earlier, this particular one, and it was one of the factor myth questions. Do you remember? This one is soy. Okay, so and the third and final one. So this one is usually harvested by hand due to the differing levels of maturity of the seeds within one plant. There are more than 120 known varieties of this thing. White and yellow have the mildest flavor, so they are good varieties to try first off if you're just getting introduced to them. And red and black have slightly stronger, earthier flavors and tend to hold their shape better when you cook them. This one's this one might be a little bit, well, they're all a bit tricky. Do you have any ideas, Chris? Do you know which one this is?
I don't know. I want to
Putting you on
say
the
like
spot.
tricky one, like maybe beans. I don't know.
It's actually, okay, think rice alternative.
Oh, maybe quinoa then.
Yeah, quinoa. This one's quinoa.
Oh,
Okay,
I didn't
so
know that.
for this presentation, the way it's organized is I've picked 3 legumes. I think the first one we're going to go through lentils, chickpeas, and beans, and just a couple methods to cook them, what they'd cost, and then a couple recipe ideas. So we'll start off with green, brown, and red lentils. So I'm just going to touch on a couple things here. I'm not going to read through it all. Just my favorite facts about them. With all legumes, they're high in fiber, and that's going to be really good for anyone that's having issues with blood sugar irregularities. And the reason for that being fiber slows down the digestion of the foods that we're eating. So when the food that we eat starts to be digested, if there's something that slows it down, and this is why when you might someone might recommend that you have a whole fruit instead of the fruit juice, because you take out that fiber, where with the whole fruit you have the fiber there and it's going to slow down the digestion and your blood sugar is not going to spike as soon as you eat it. So yeah, lentils, chickpeas, beans, everything we'll talk about here are going to be higher in fiber. So really good options for any blood sugar irregularities. Protein. So this particular comparison is with chicken. So about a half a cup of chicken has the same amount of protein as 3/4 cup of lentils. So I know a big concern with dried foods is that you're not getting enough protein. But you can see here with this comparison, it's really not that hard to get as much protein as you need with dried foods. And then, yeah, vitamins and minerals. The other thing about dried foods and plant-based protein is it's going to have a very diverse range of vitamins and minerals. And I guess I'll just read the last line there. That's something that I highlighted for lentils is the mix of fiber, folic acid, and potassium in lentils makes them a heart-healthy choice. But yeah, I mean, you'll probably get these slides afterwards, so feel free to read through the notes a little bit more carefully when you get them and follow up with any questions that you have. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so lentils are kind of fun when you cook them because depending on what lentil you have, the way you cook them will be a little bit different. I love red split lentils because they're so fast to cook. So if you get a bag of dried red split lentils, usually with legumes, with dried foods, you want to soak them for a decent amount of time, especially with beans and chickpeas. I like to soak them overnight, the night before I'm going to use them. But with red split lentils, even like 30 minutes before you use them is okay. They'll start to break down right away. So red split lentils are really nice because once you've cooked them, they can be used in a lot of bases for meals that you already make. So if you want to add them to spaghetti sauce, tomato sauce, or if you want to add it to a curry, really any sauce, because it breaks down into kind of like a mush essentially when you cook it. And so it's going to be this nutrient dense, protein dense, thing that you can add to most of your recipes and not really notice. So if you have any picky eaters at home, it is a good way to slip it in. But yeah, essentially with all of these legumes, what you want to start with is soaking it. So you'll soak for anywhere from the night before to 30 minutes before you want to use it. And then you want to rinse it really well. You want to get that starchy layer off and rinse, and then you're going to cook. And you can do it right on the stovetop. So again, you'll have these slides, so you'll see the exact directions, but you just combine with water, put the rinsed and soaked legumes in a pan, lots of water, and bring to a boil and just keep on cooking, and you'll know it's done. You can just try it. It's not going to be something that, like, if it's undercooked, it's dangerous. That's the nice thing about legumes. It'll be a little crunchy and not super pleasant, but just keep cooking it until it's a nice consistency. Yeah, green and brown lentils. Sorry, I kind of started on the wrong side, but we're gonna go to the left side now. Green and brown lentils are a little bit thicker, so they're going to take a bit longer to cook. And that's why it's nice to soak them the night before, because that kind of starts that breakdown process, and it won't take as long to cook. The other thing about soaking too is it does help with the digestion of these things. Some people find that they have a hard time digesting legumes, and soaking them and rinsing them beforehand is going to help if you find that you're someone that does struggle with digesting these things. Okay, so a recipe idea, I think is the next slide. Red split lentil soup. So this is kind of a cream-based soup, but instead of cream, you would use the lentils, the red split lentils. And you would put it in a blender or use an immersion blender for this. But if you just want a regular stew, then you don't have to do that. And I've got a recipe book that I'm going to send to Chris, or that Chris is going to send out to you guys afterwards with detailed directions there. But yeah, just red lentils, carrots, bell pepper, and some vegetable broth, and then some pesto. Red pesto is really hard to find here, I've learned, so any kind of pesto is fine, but just season however you like. And then you blend it all up. So you cook all of those things first, and then you blend it. But yeah, it's a really affordable option for 4 servings. It's about $3 per serving. Okay, so the next slide. Yeah, okay, so this is the cost of a bag of lentils. So the average cost of green lentils is about $4.70 for a bag, which works out to be about 50 cents a serving. And the average cost of red lentils is about $4.50 for a bag, or 45 cents per serving. So really good choice. All right, question for you guys. How does dietary fiber support digestion? Or just like one thing about dietary fiber, if you can put in the chat, what's something cool about fiber? Food side fiber. Yeah, go ahead. You can say it if you'd like. Yeah. So my person said blood sugar. It does help from keeping your blood sugar from spiking. Is there anybody that said anything, Anna, in the chat?
Not yet,
All right, let me know
but
if
we're just gonna wait a little bit. Hopefully we'll get something. Oh yeah, we have another regulated blood sugar.
Nice. Yeah, for sure. Kind of keeps you regular too. It kind of works as a broom to sweep things through, and yeah, yeah. Yeah, fiber is great for, I mean, the other thing to consider too is what Chris mentioned earlier. You don't want to kind of go overboard with it all of a sudden, but yeah, it's really good for keeping you regular, managing blood sugar, and sweeping through your digestive system. Okay, let's move on to, I think it's chickpeas next. Yeah. So the other thing with blood sugar, people like to look at the glycemic index of foods, and chickpeas are low on the glycemic index. And if you haven't heard of glycemic index before, GI before, it's essentially how fast something breaks down, how quickly your blood sugar rises after you eat something. So because chickpeas are quite low on the glycemic index, it's something that's safe for anyone with, or for most people with diabetes, or any blood sugar irregularities. And then gut flora. So one of my favorite topics, as far as nutrition goes, is the microbiome. We could do weeks and weeks on just the microbiome, but something that I really like about chickpeas, and a fun fact, is that they do have a type of bacteria in them that once it's broken down, something that's produced in that process, or the byproduct of that breaking down, is called butyrate. And butyrate is really important for reducing inflammation, particularly in the intestinal system. But generally speaking, when you're eating whole foods, you're going to be feeding the bacteria. And so there definitely are reasons why we might crave certain things over others. So for example, you might crave salty foods because your adrenals need some support. But generally speaking, when we crave food, it's the bacteria in us that's craving it. It's not really us. Well, it's the bacteria anyway. So the more we feed that bacteria and the more it grows, the more we're going to want to eat the foods that we've been feeding it. So this is just something to keep in mind. If you are having a bit of a hard time switching to whole foods or switching to legumes, it might not be the thing that you really crave at first, but after a while, that microbiome is going to start wanting what you're feeding it. And these whole foods do have really positive outcomes in the microbiome when we eat them, as you've seen here with butyrate. Yeah, and then so the last point with chickpeas is that they do contain plant sterols. And the really cool thing about plant sterols is they interfere with the body's absorption of cholesterol. So plant sterols kind of mimic cholesterol. They're very structurally similar. So our body will, I guess, the uptake of that plant sterol. It will use the uptake of that plant sterol instead of the cholesterol, so it can help keep your cholesterol levels regular. Next slide, please. Okay. So one of the most intimidating things about cooking dried foods for me was the pressure cooker. So like we talked about the lentils, you can do it on a stovetop. Soak your chickpeas beforehand, do it the night before so that they're good and soft and they won't take very long on the stovetop. But if you're going to pressure cook it, go for it. Pressure cooking is awesome. You put everything in and you set it and you can walk away. I remember the first time that I cooked anything with a pressure cooker, I was so scared of the release valve. I had a spatula and I was standing really far away from it, trying to release the steam, and it was quite intimidating, but you do it a couple times and then it's fine. But the nice thing about pressure cooking is you don't have to soak it beforehand. Definitely still rinse. Rinse your legumes before you cook, no matter what the method is. But yeah, you can also, when you're cooking these things, whether it's the pressure cooker or a stovetop, add the seasoning while you're cooking it. So in the pressure cooker, I like to do bay leaves. That's what you can use your cinnamon leaves for, or your cinnamon basil. You can do bay leaves, you can do basil, you can do, add your salt, of course, and anything else that you want to add, and it will help with the flavor. And like Chris said earlier, some of these plant-based foods do need some help with flavor. I find, like when we were talking about red lentils earlier, they are the most flavorful of the things we're going to be talking about today. I find it has a little bit of a spice to it. So maybe not as much of a challenge to make that taste good, but the rest of them, I would definitely add your favorite seasonings. You can't go wrong. Do some trial and error and just, yeah, taste it as you go. Like I said, you can cook until it's ready and try it as you go, add what you need, and yeah, you'll figure it out. So a recipe for chickpeas. So if you are somebody that likes chicken salad sandwiches or tuna sandwiches, this could be a good alternative and a very budget-wise alternative. So chickpea salad is essentially just made with cooked chickpeas that you mash up. You can just use a fork, and you kind of keep it a little bit whole when you're doing it, but then you add whatever veggies you want. If you put celery in your tuna salad or chicken salad, you use celery. If you want to use finely chopped pickles, that would work too. I like to put red onion in mine. A lot of people will do mayonnaise. I like to do hummus, and then just whatever toppings you want on your sandwich. That's a really easy one. $2.85 a serving. Yeah, and then the average cost of chickpea beans is about $3.50 for a bag, which works out to about 30 cents a serving. Okay, how does the glycemic index of food affect blood sugar levels? We spent a very short amount of time on that, so if anybody wants to take a stab at it, I'd be very impressed. Maybe one of our nutritionists can comment. Mhm.
Nothing yet. I think we might have posed too hard of a question. Oh, wait, maybe.
Oh.
Low glycemic index has less effect on blood sugar.
Yeah, so as essentially your blood sugar is less or it's not going to increase as quickly with something that is low on the glycemic index. Anything you want to add there, Chris?
I think glycemic index, yeah, I think that's a really good sort of analysis of what it is. The higher the glycemic index, the higher it would impact your blood sugar in isolation. But I think new research really shows that making sure that your whatever sugary foods or whatever glycemic index foods you have, it's just important to pair it with something with fiber and some protein. And that can really help stabilize your blood sugar. So even if you have a very high glycemic index food, if you do pair it with, some really good whole grains for that fiber and maybe some protein, then that would probably have a lot less impact on your blood sugar than like maybe something that's like a medium glycemic index food, but that's just on its own. And that's really, as Hannah, really went into, is just due to the digestion and metabolism of like the blood sugar and how important fiber and protein is in slowly digesting those sugars in the bloodstream.
Yeah, and if you have any questions about how you can combine these things, because it definitely can be intimidating trying to figure out even just snacking throughout the day, what you can pair to make that work. It is a bit of a challenge. Definitely reach out to the nutritionist that's close to you, and we can help you through that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the last one we're going to talk about. Black beans are my favorite because I really like Mexican food. And so they're really great as something you can add on a Buddha bowl, on nachos. I just said Mexican food and then said Buddha bowl, but it's really great as an option to add to lots of things, including nachos, tacos. But yeah, just a little summary of black beans and how they're great for you nutrition wise. Same thing, high in fiber, going to help with keeping your digestive system working smoothly, balancing cholesterol, keeping yourself regular, keeping that broom being swept through your intestinal system and slowing digestion. Micronutrients, black beans are really high in antioxidants, which is something essentially that cancels out free radicals in your body. So free radicals are the thing that floats around, things that float around and cause damage to your cells. And antioxidants are essentially molecules that go around and stabilize these free radicals. They lend electrons and stabilize the free radicals, and so everyone's stable and happy. So black beans are high in those. And then protein. So again, 18 grams of protein, which is 1 cup of black beans is about 18 grams of protein, similar to half the amount of protein in a cup of chicken breast. Okay. So to cook black beans on the stovetop or to pressure cook them, again, if you're pressure cooking, you don't have to worry about soaking it the night before. But if you're doing it on the stovetop, definitely try and soak it for as long as you can. Rinse really well either way. And add your seasonings, add your bay leaf, add your oh, the other thing I wanted to say actually, onion is really nice in chickpea and black beans in the pressure cooker. So if you can add your onion in when before you turn the pressure cooker on, it's going to add a lot of flavor. It's my favorite thing to do. Um, the other thing I was going to say, oh, when so I'm kind of jumping back here for a second, but I wanted to say, since we're talking about budget-friendly nutrition, it's kind of nice to use every part of what you have. So the water that you cook chickpeas in, you can reuse that. It's called aquafaba. You can whip it up and use it in, you can use it as an egg replacement in a lot of dishes, or you can make like whipped creams out of it and things like that. But also just to store things in. So your chickpeas, your beans, and your lentils, if you're going to do them in the pressure cooker, the water that you cook them in will keep them longer if you store it in the fridge in the water it's been cooked in. It's just a little fact there. Yeah, okay. And then, so a recipe using black beans. Actually, one of my coworkers here did this recently and she told me about it. So she took a sweet potato, cut it up real thin, put it on a baking sheet with a parchment paper lined, and then just essentially put all the toppings on that she wanted to. You can make your own taco seasoning and mix it with your black beans after they're cooked, or just use a taco seasoning. And then, yeah, you can put avocado on there. You can use salsa or cream cheese, whatever you've got. But essentially, you just need those 3 ingredients to start with: your sweet potato, your black beans, and some seasoning. And it makes a really good nacho dish for something to have for comfort food if you're looking for something snacky. And yeah, it's about $4.60 a serving for that one. And yeah, so for bags of black beans, it works out to about 35 cents per serving when you get a bag of black beans. So the other thing I wanted to say before we do this last comprehension question, and it kind of goes back to what Chris was talking about with canned legumes. They're a really good option too. You don't have to cook dried foods on the stove. You don't have to get your pressure cooker out. If you want to do a canned version, that is a good way to start, especially if you're just getting into incorporating more legumes and plant-based options into your diet. The one thing I would say is, again, make sure it's rinsed really well too, because oftentimes these canned things have a very high sodium content. So just make sure you're rinsing them really well. So the last question, and then I think I am done. How do plant-based sources of protein differ from animal-based sources of protein? So I'm actually just going to answer this one for you guys, because I don't think that I said it at all. But Chris mentioned this earlier as well. You don't need to worry about whether or not your protein is coming from an animal source or a plant-based source. But essentially the difference is the amino acid profile of each option. So not really something to consider too heavily, especially if you're having protein at multiple times during the day or having it in all of your meals or in your snacks. You're going to get all of the amino acids you need. But just as a fact to keep in your back pocket, there are some plant-based proteins that have all of the amino acids, all of the essential amino acids in them. An example of that would be quinoa. And an essential amino acid is an amino acid we need to get from our food. So there are a few of them that we need to get from our food, and quinoa is an example of a plant-based protein that has all of them. But again, just have protein, as much protein as Chris was talking about earlier, and you'll get everything that you need. Sorry. Okay, I went through that really quickly because I know we're quite over with time, but if there's anything that I didn't spend long enough on, or if I glazed over it and you have more questions, feel free to put them in the chat or email me afterwards or talk to your local nutritionist, and we'll spend more time on them.
Sure. Thank you, Hannah. And then one last thing I wanted to touch on, forgot to mention, is we also want to rinse, if you do use canned legumes or canned beans, we want to rinse them because that slime that it comes in, like that's actually that's what causes the gassiness and bloating and discomfort. So that's why it's important to rinse them. And if you rinse them well, then you should really minimize the impact it has on your bloating and gas and whatnot. Okay, so I'm going to kind of breeze through this last little bit. Yeah, you guys will have access to these slides, but like I said, please reach out to us to schedule a free consultation or follow up. Yeah, we'll have a couple of minutes here for questions. Like I said, you guys will have access to all these slides and everything. And in case we do run out of time and it gets cut out, thank you everyone for being a part of this. I really appreciate it. And we do have other events coming up. So stay tuned on our website. Yeah, a couple minutes here if anyone has any questions.
Just wanted to let you guys know that we did get a couple of good feedback here, that it was very informative and that you guys did a great job. So
Thank you, Hannah.
while we
Yeah,
wait for
thanks
the
everyone.
questions,
It's probably for Hannah, but thanks, Hannah.
that was for both of you.
Yeah, and like I said, so September for Truth and Reconciliation Month, we will be having an Indigenous dietitian to do a webinar for us on traditional foods in BC, and how we can decolonize our food system. So we're really excited about that. So please stay tuned on our website and social media and posters in our store for that.
We're just getting more thank yous. So I think that means
Great.
you guys did a great job and explained everything really well.
Great. Thanks, Anna. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the week. And you'll have this in the next few days or so. We'll send this out to everyone.